the silence of a waking mountain, just before dawn stretches her arms across the ridgeline, there is a hush that rides the wind. Powder rests soft upon the earth. Skies are tender with slate color and quiet. No crowds, no music, no gates marked with numbers. Only snow, slope, and sky. The half-pipe, nestled in ancient winter, waits not like an arena, but like an invitation. Somewhere in this tranquil vastness, a young rider slips her boots into bindings. Click, click, a breath fogs the cold air, and then a slide, not sharp or boastful, just a whisper against glistening white. She carves her way up the wall of air and gravity, arcs gently like a question mark in the sky, then falls back into the cradle of the pipe like a feather that knew the wind too well. Snowboarding is not loud at heart. It is the quiet rush of balance defied, the poetry of angles turned fluid. It is motion without noise, rebellion without anger. In its best moments, it is wonder set loose. Among all who have danced in this gravity play, there was once a girl named Chloe Kim, a name light as snowfall, now spoken in golden echoes around the world. She didn't just win, she floated, soared, bent the cold to her joy. And yet, if you were to ask her, she might tell you she was just playing. This, then, is not the story of medals and podiums. Not really. This is the story of what it sounds like inside the air when dreaming becomes action and flight becomes memory. We begin not with fame, but with breath, with mornings before the world arrives, with one girl and her board, stitching a lullaby into the snow. Imagine her small, not yet a name, riding up to Mammoth Mountain in the back seat of a worn family car. Her eyelids heavy, head against the chilled window. Mountains rising ahead like slumbering giants wearing cloaks of blue and white. Her father at the wheel, devoted and determined, humming worry into the steering wheel. Long drives, early wake-ups. Little feet lacing up boots meant for heroes. How does one become the best in the world and still laugh like a child? Maybe the answer lives in that snowy stillness before the first run, where sound vanishes and the only rhythm is your own heartbeat. Maybe greatness isn't a mountain climbed, but a choice to ride with joy again and again down slopes, where no one asked you to prove anything. Some athletes roar when they succeed, some make empires of their names, and some are rare. Few simply glide, moving through the world with a grace that whispers, not demands. Chloe Kim was one such whisper. You may know the highlights, the gold medals, the finishes that shattered gravity and the expectations of what a teenager could do. But beyond that, her story flows like a quiet river, shaped by family, by dual cultures, by the soft push and pull of identity and ambition. It is a story of a girl who became a symbol, not because she chased attention, but because she made peace with the sky. In this quiet world, the snow absorbs sound. Shouts, claps, camera clicks, they all fade. But the memory of a turn well-timed, a spin well-placed, a laugh tumbling after a perfect landing, these lingered dots. So tonight, as we tuck into the stillness of another winter's eve, let's follow this trail gently. Let's begin not with triumph, but with a question. How does someone so young carry the weight of greatness and still make it look like play? Let's listen to her footsteps in the powder, to the edges of her board carving, a lullaby into the silent walls of the half-pipe. Let us drift now into her story. In a modest house in Long Beach, California, where the sunlight drips warm through palm-lined streets, a child was born to a pair of dreamers. Jongjin and Borin Kim had arrived in the United States from South Korea with hopes that echoed quietly as for opportunity, for education, for a peace they could pass on. Their daughter, Chloe, held both continents in her palm from the very beginning. Her first language danced between English and Korean, sentences stitched in a bilingual rhythm. Chopsticks beside grilled cheese, Korean soap operas murmuring in the living room, while cartoons in bright American voices flickered on the screen. She would come to ride between these worlds the same way she'd later ride the snow, smiling, seen and unseen. There was no initial prophecy in her steps, no banner overhead that read champion in the making. Just a girl, curious, a little shy, with a bright laugh that opened easily. But Jongjin, her father, watched closely. He saw how she moved, how she mimicked, how she found joy in precision. And so, perhaps by instinct, perhaps by something softer than logic, he handed her a snowboard when she was just 4 years old. The board was small child-sized. The snow at Mountain High wasn't grand, but cold enough. She fell quickly, laughed harder, stood again, each time she rose. There was something more in her, a fascination, a grit not yet named. Jongjin watched, light catching in his glasses, and something shifted in him too. There, in his daughter's fall and rise, he saw a life's purpose forming. By the time Chloe was 7, the weekend drive started. 300 miles round trip from Long Beach to Mammoth Mountain in the Sierra Nevada. They'd wake while the stars were still out. Chloe curled under a blanket in the back seat, her father quietly sipping coffee as the tires hummed along empty highways. Sometimes it snowed, sometimes it didn't. Always there was that same hush. Before the mountain opened its arms, in those snowy arms, Chloe found early rhythm, legs that bent just right, turns that came as if from memory. Her body, still so small, seemed to sense something unspoken. Each edge against the slope spoke to her more clearly than classroom chalkboards ever could. Her father watched again, and this time he made a choice. He gave up his engineering career, filed the papers, shut an old chapter. From that moment on, his daughter's story became his own. He became coach, driver, cook, cheerleader, guardian of both her triumphs and her exhaustion. Other parents marveled. Reporters, in time, would ask him why. He would smile, because she's the one who can fly. Back in Long Beach, Chloe straddled the invisible tension of identity. In school, she was the funny one, the friendly one, sometimes the only Asian girl in the room. Her mother taught her humility, her father discipline, both wrapped in the quiet dignity of Korean values. But on the mountain, identity scattered like snowflakes caught in sun. There she was just Chloe, no translation. She began entering junior competitions at 6. At 8, she was already leaving kids twice her size in the slipstream of her turns. By 10, whispers began among coaches. This girl is different. She flows. She locks into a rhythm downhill like she's skipping stones across clouds. There's precision, but it's playful. Fire, but friendly. She doesn't break gravity, she harmonizes with it. Home felt increasingly like a rest stop on a longer journey. Mammoth became her second address. She enrolled in a school designed for athletes, kept up grades between events, tucked under hotel blankets with textbooks and hot Cheetos. Interviews and early media flashes started drifting in, always met with the same shrug and grin. "I'm just having fun," she'd say, and no one doubted her. As her talent sharpened, so too did her routine. Early wake-ups weren't rare, they were rhythm. Training sessions bled into dinner. Practice runs became muscle memory. Her father remained close, quiet in the background, always ready with snacks, tools, encouragement. He didn't shout, he whispered, sometimes only with his presence. When she doubted herself, he stood steady. When she laughed, he exhaled, and through it all came the quiet tug of culture, the gentle weaving of old and new. Chloe stayed fluent in Korean, understood respect, understood expectations, knew what it meant to carry your family's hope in both arms. But she also wore baggy beanies, made jokes in English and snow slang, flicked snow off her gloves with the irreverence of someone who rides because it feels good, not because anyone told her to. She was weaving a new thread loyal to her heritage, playful with the present. A first-generation story written with edge turns and altitude. When she turned 13, the impossible happened. She joined the US snowboarding team, younger than most junior competitors at the time. Not by age alone did she turn heads, but by the way she rode power packed into graceful form, half-turns that floated tens of feet above what most called expected. Yet, even as applause grew, she remained disarmingly down to earth. She liked dessert. She texted friends the way all teens do. She curled into heavy hotel comforters with sleepy satisfaction after a long day. She called her mum when she missed home. She listened to K-pop on long drives, sometimes loud, sometimes soft. The dichotomy endured, a comet wrapped in childlike warmth. But perhaps the most telling part of her early years was not the medals or sponsorships. Not even her jaw-dropping Olympic qualifying runs. It was the quiet persistence. Chloe never rushed. She allowed her love of the sport to lead. Snow wasn't just terrain, it was home. Her runs weren't performances, they were conversations. And behind her, in shadows and spotlight alike, her parents guarded that sanctuary. Boren watched from the quieter edges, nurturing calm. Songjin, forever nearby, posted photos, shared pride, not in boast, but in awe, as if he, too, could barely believe the softness turned strength he witnessed each day. In many ways, Chloe Kim was not sculpted by coaches or sponsors, but by long rides to snowy mornings, by small gestures, extra thermos, a shared silence, a gloved hand held. She became extraordinary, not in leaps, but in layers, each snowfall adding its own softness, each fall teaching its own recovery, each breath at altitude a lesson in resilience. She was not destined, perhaps, but devoted, not driven by glory, but by love. Love for speed, for balance, for the feeling of flight with no strings. And beneath all the schedules and accolades, at heart, she was still the girl leaning tiredly against a car window, watching the mountains draw near, dreaming not of crowns, but of crisp air, clear lines, and one more ride before the sun dipped. Lo, before the world knew her name, before headlines and hashtags, before gold and gravity defiance, there was the quiet beginning of a girl born of two worlds, shaped by snow and sacrifice, carried not by ambition alone, but by the steady hush of winter mornings and the whispering promise of the next run. The story of Chloe Kim starts not with a trophy, but with a question whispered in snowfall. What if joy is enough to change the world? The snow starts to remember her. Not just the slopes of Mammoth, but the stitched half-pipes of Copper Mountain, the icy contours at Stratton, and the foreign flakes she chased across edges of the globe. Her board, once a curiosity in her hands, was now an extension of her thoughts, turning, flipping, coiling through the air like a whispered poem. By age 9, Chloe Kim was no longer just trying out snowboarding. She was crafting something exquisite with it. And yet, there was no hurry. In her story, she looked like a child because she was one bouncing between homework and snow goggles, stopping for frozen yogurt after practice, giggling through rest days with disheveled hair still holding hints of cold. But when the helmet came down over her smile, something shifted. It wasn't intensity. It wasn't even ambition. It was clarity, the kind that settles in when you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Her first contests were small, local, friendly, sometimes conducted under flurries that blurred the finish line. But Chloe moved differently. Coaches noticed how she didn't fight the air, she welcomed it. Her takeoffs came not from brute force, but from rhythm, from a growing mutual understanding between her and motion. She carried herself like she didn't yet know what limits were. And in truth, she didn't buy. Age 12, she was already painting arcs across the national stage. Victories whispered her way, almost apologetically, as if they knew she hadn't asked for them. She wasn't the loud kind. No chesty poujing, no camaraderie declarations. Just a focused blink behind mirrored goggles, a graceful descent, and a smile afterward, relieved. Maybe that the run felt right, that the air had listened. When she qualified for the US snowboarding team at 13, it sent snowflakes shivering through the sport's assumptions. Not because she was young, but because she was unbothered. There was no show of triumph. She simply took her place alongside legends years her senior half their size, but already their equal in air dot. She stood on the same podiums. She wore the same heavy jacket, the same team patches, but hers fluttered a little looser. Her laugh still sparkled with sleepovers and pop music. There wasn't a separation between young girl and world-class athlete. They coexisted in her with harmony. And yet, just as she was rising, just as the world was beginning to take serious notice, quiet, heartbreak floated in. It was 2014. The world turned its attention to Sochi, the Winter Olympics. Reporters gathered, cameras rolled, and Chloe Kim, 17 in skill but 13 in her passport, watched from the sidelines. She wasn't allowed to compete. The rules were strict. You had to be 15 to go. There was sympathy, of course. Announcers lamented the quirk of timing. But in Chloe, a quiet fire lit. To see a space you knew belonged to you. To watch it Kloskan be a particular kind of ache. Her talent had already soared beyond her years. She was, by many measures, one of the world's best. But time withheld the final stage. Not because she wasn't ready, but because the calendar said, not yet. So she trained harder. She didn't cry publicly, didn't rage on social media. She inhaled the sigh of what could have been and turned it into momentum. Time would come. And when it did, she would not just arrive. She would arrive soaring. Those missed Olympics became a pause in a song she was still composing. Back home, the snow waited. Soft, unjudging. Mammoth welcomed her again, as if to say, "It's all right, there is more mountain to write on. More air to speak with." Her adolescence began to take shape around the contours of world competitions. X Games, do tours, Europa Cups in countries she could scrabble on a map. The distances were long, but her center remained still. Airports, interviews. Jet lag all wrapped around the familiar, that quiet moment before a run. That intake of breath before lift. And then, the numbers started to blink gold. Her name edged onto scoreboards with increasing certainty, not just as a phenom, but as a challenger, as the one to beat. Judges sat up straighter. Analysts adjusted their scripts. This wasn't a fluke. This wasn't gifted youth. This was a new language being spoken in the HALFPIPE. Her writing style matured fast. While others leaned on tricks to dazzle, Chloe measured her runs like a musician beats, pauses, crescendos, timed with precision, spins with clean landings, crossed grabs that looked painted mid-air. Her form whispered control even amid chaos. Whispers soon turned into reverence. But she never let the magnitude of it settle too close. Still the same girl, fixing her bootlaces with gloved fingers. Still texting lol after a perfect run. Still offering a wave of thank you to skilled guards and slurping noodle soup between events. If the world wanted her to rush, she chose rhythm instead. A quiet rhythm. One that didn't dismiss success, but refused to chase it like a storm. She came for the feeling, not the fame. The flight, not the finish line. Friends her age were learning to drive or studying for finals. Chloe was in Portugal for training heat, then Switzerland for slopestyle. Her off-season might include algebra and an online test. Her off-season might also include a podium under strobe lights. But inside, the same pulse steadied her. Snowboarding wasn't about escaping life. It was a way she listened deplete to it. Each run, a chance to feel. Each wall of the pipe, a challenge to transcend fear, not defy it. She carried the weight of rising stardom with an amused grace. Magazine spreads and interviews, handshakes and sponsorships. One foot in celebrity and one still gliding through. The early morning hush of Mammoth, her father ever near, warming his fingers between runs. By the time she neared the 2018 Winter Olympics, she was no longer too young to compete. She was no longer waiting for the call that didn't come. She was the call, a story forming with every descending arc, a question answered with every takeoff. What happens when you fly before the world expects you to? And still she smiled like none of it was happening to her. As if this were all just another sleepy morning in the mountains. Just another glide down frozen velvet. Just another chance to whisper into the wind, I am here and I remember how to play. The mountains of South Korea wore a different kind of silence that winter. Not the silence of solitude, but of breath, held the stillness just before a note is played. A runner takes their mark, or a child, now grown, returns home in triumph. Pyeongchang's air was cold and clear, like a bell struck once and now ringing through the valleys. The world had gathered lights. Lights glowed along the edges of the halfpipe like constellations drawn by architects of sport. And under that sky, Chloe Kim arrived, a guest of honor beneath 1,000 gazers. But listen closely. She didn't arrive with trumpets or parades. She walked, smiled, waved. She laughed at herself in interviews, tweeted about ice cream and churros and stared at the snow like it was something she'd always known. Because it was. This was not a coronation. It was a return to somewhere she'd never truly been, and yet somehow always belonged. Her parents were there. Jong-jin with his quiet pride, absorbing the moment in stillness. Boran near him, carrying both nerves and love in equal weight. They understood what this meant. Korea was not just a location in the passport of her lineage. It was the language of lullabies, the undertone of her discipline. Chloe moved between cultures with the ease of someone who never saw them as separate. This land had never been her home, not exactly, but her roots hummed through the soil just the same. The Olympic Village buzzed. Foreign languages layered like snowdrifts. Reporters asked and asked. Was she nervous? Did she feel pressure? Would she win? She shrugged. She smiled. I'm just trying to enjoy it, she said. And she meant it. That was her secret. The pipe waited, carved not just in snow, but in global expectation. Every rider who dropped in left behind a trace, air-disturbed moments marked in arcs. And landings? The crowd roared, paused, murmured. But when Chloe dropped in, it was like time tucked itself beneath her board. The noise faded. All that remained was rhythm. Her first run was clean, a statement, decisive, confident, free. She pulled a back-to-back 1080, twice spinning through sky with every degree balanced on instinct and muscle. Feet landed, board kissed powder, arms lifted, judges blinked, scores soared. But even then, she seemed untouched by pressure. She didn't race to the numbers. She waited, laughed again, retied her boot as if fixing a sock. There was something sacred in her ease. The second run, even stronger, controlled, stylish. Higher, but still, she smiled at the end, as if unsure what the fuss was about. On Twitter, she joked about being hangry. Around the world, children saw themselves in her. Not just Asian girls, not just athletes, but all those who'd wondered whether greatness could be worn lightly. And then came the final run. She didn't need it, not really. Her earlier scores had already gold-paved her name across the rankings. She could have stayed at the top, just watching. But Chloe Kim was not built for holding back. Not when the air still waited. Not when the snow offered one more chance to speak. The back-to-back 1080s returned, this time sharper, higher, willing to occupy the angles others feared. The amplitude alone was defiant, a dare to gravity with grace in every turn. Then, the landing, precise, effortless. The kind of culmination only possible when joy and discipline are braided tightly and hum in your heartbeat. The pipe was a cradle, and she a lullaby written in snow and arcs. When she stood at the bottom, arms raised gently, not in triumph, but in recognition, the mountains themselves seemed pleased. Gold, 17 years old. First place, first American woman to land that combination in the Olympics. And somehow, more importantly, herself. Entirely herself. She blew a kiss too. The cameras. She hugged her dad, tears not quite falling. Reporters scrambled for words. But Chloe, smiling, simply kept being Chloe. Her story did not shift its tone with the weight of the medal. It held steady, like a board beneath boots in the halfpipe's curve, like a breath before flight. Later, she would reflect how proud she was to do this in Korea, how meaningful it was for her grandmother to watch, how she wanted to represent both her countries and their languages, both her generations and her quirks. She spoke Korean in interviews when she could, grinned when people recognized her in shops. She was American and Korean and young and ancient in the soul, a mosaic painted mid-air. The gold did not change her. It simply echoed what she'd always known, that doing something with love, even on the world's biggest stage, never needs to be loud. When the closing ceremonies came and flags waved, and the world began to look toward the next story, Chloe quietly folded her chapter with a familiar laugh. She wasn't chasing legacy. She was simply writing one in reverse, each trick, each spin, a sentence drifting upward instead of down. She would go home, to California's sun, to dorm rooms and instant noodles, to reflective pauses about what was next. But part of her, the part that danced in Korean sky, that whispered joy into every turn, would remain in Pyeongchang like a fresh carving on snow. A small shape, luminous and unworried. The girl who flew higher and made it feel like home. The gold medal was never heavy, not when Chloe held it to her chest, not when she stood tall beneath the falling snowflakes of flashbulbs, her heart still pulsing with the rhythm of that final run in Pyeongchang. That kind of weight felt light, like a laugh shared, like air caught in a perfect 1080 rotation. But what came after was different. After the cheering stopped, after the podium had been taken down and the giant Olympic rings were packed away, something else settled. It wasn't sadness. Not exactly. It was a kind of hush that followed her into the next chapter. A sudden stillness in the wake of having reached the place she'd been racing toward her whole young life. And now, there was so much silence, but not the kind that snow makes, not the peaceful kind. This silence asked questions she hadn't prepared to answer. Who was she now? 17, already the best, already golden. Where do you go from there? She smiled a lot. She posed for photos, spoke kindly in interviews, signed autographs with a chirpy pen. She grinned when strangers approached her in airports. But inside, things drifted. The sparkle had begun to dim, not because she'd lost anything, but because everything had arrived all at once, and she hadn't quite had time to catch up. Fame makes strange echoes. It carries your voice farther than you intended, and sometimes returns to you sounding unfamiliar. For Chloe, the echoes felt off-pitch. Crowds wanted a performance, not always. A person. Headlines saw her as a brand, not always a girl. And she's still so young, still tender despite all her triumphs, opened the door to it, trying to be what people believed she already was. There were magazine covers, red carpet events, late-night interviews. There were sponsorship meetings, cameras that watched her walk to coffee, demands from companies that studied her grin like it was a commodity. She was grateful. She said so often, but inside the gratitude was something unspoken, trembling. She was tired and afraid and unsure how to say so. The mountain never asked that of her. The mountain watched her rise with no interest in marketability. The air never told her she needed to maintain anything other than calm. But the world in its way wanted her to stay perfect, playful, iconic. Achieving so, she pulled back. Quietly, bravely, entirely. She enrolled at Princeton University, not because it promised answers, but because it offered space, time, a room of her own. She joined a freshman class of poets and biologists, historians and idealists. People whose questions had nothing to do with amplitude or trick scores. For a moment, no one asked her to fly. On campus, she walked in snow that had no cameras. She studied ethics and political theory. She got bad grades sometimes and stayed up past midnight eating junk food that wasn't being photographed. If she slipped on ice, no one tweeted about it. It was ordinary and therefore nourishing, she said. Later, that she didn't feel like herself after the Olympics, that she needed time away, not to rest her body, but her soul. And in the soft hush of Ivy League evenings, she tried to remember who Chloe was before the world had declared her exceptional, because she hadn't stopped loving snowboarding. Far from it, but something had changed. Its center had shifted. What was once her secret joy, her mischievous art, felt different now, heavy with expectations, slippery with obligation. She ached to reclaim the hush of the feeling of carving. Arcs for no reason but the night sky, and the sulfur scent of fresh powder. But the mind plays tricks. She began to feel anxious before competitions, The thought of losing, tears welling before she even reached the slope. She faced injuries, criticism from crowds who didn't understand why she needed time. People said cruel things online about her race, her decisions, her body. Imagine being 19, 20 and scrolling through demands that you must stay excellent forever, must juggle being invincible and relatable, must be the gold medal even when you just want to breathe. In interviews, she began to speak about it, the fear, the loneliness, the pressure, not in dramatic declaration, in soft-spoken honesty. It felt wrong to complain, she said. People had lifted her up, celebrated her. She was lucky, she was successful, and yet, winning had become a prison without visible walls. There were days she barely got out of bed, days the slope didn't feel like freedom, but something resembling a test she could only ever get a perfect score on. But something miraculous began to happen as she spoke. Other voices joined in, young athletes, students, strangers, people who said, "Thank you," because the world is not in short supply of trophies, but it is deeply, desperately in need of truth. And in allowing herself to be vulnerable, Chloe reminded everyone watching that the most extraordinary thing about her was never her medals. It was her ability to stay human. That, too, is a kind of flight. Not airborne, but inward. Not spinning above the clouds, but pausing beneath them. And as the seasons turned, and the half-pipe once again began to call her name, not with pressure, but with promise, Chloe Kim began to answer. Not because she had to, because she wanted to, but that is a return, and another quiet chapter. One we will begin in its time. For now we sit in the hush between triumph and rediscovery, in the space where gold loses its shine and something even more luminous begins to take shape. The snow hadn't changed. Not really. It still fell the same way, soft, slow, like breath made visible. The half-pipe still stood beneath the sky like an open parenthesis, waiting for someone to write a sentence of motion inside it. But for Chloe, the silence felt different now. It no longer greeted her like a friend. It stood at a slight distance, watching, waiting to see who she would be when she returned. She had stepped away from competition, taken time to learn who she was without the lift of the crowd or the pull of momentum. But the air missed her, and eventually she missed it back. Not immediately, not confidently, but the call returned, quiet first, like an itch in her palms when watching snow fall, like the memory of flight in her muscles while tying her shoes. The board began to feel familiar again, weightless in her hands, comfortable against her boots. At first, she trained in pieces, short sessions, fewer tricks, testing the waters like a swimmer returning after cold. There was fear this time, not just of falling, but of whether joy would meet her there again. She had changed, grown. Pain had colored the edges of her earlier lightness. But change, she began to realize, is not the opposite of strength. Sometimes it is its source. Her body, taller now, stronger, carried more memories. Her mind carried more questions. But underneath both, the same rhythm still hummed. Breath, drop, spin, land, repeat. Leading into the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing, she kept her circle small. Family, coaches she trusted, moments of solitude folded into practice days. There were days she wanted to quit, not because she didn't love it, but because she didn't feel ready to be seen again. She'd been wounded, not visibly, but across nerves and nerves of expectation. To fly again meant offering vulnerability to the wind, to fall where the world could watch and judge. But for Chloe, the return was not about victory. It was about something else entirely. Wholeness, choice. The path back was littered with questions, some asked by others, some only whispered within. Could she win again? Should she? Did she still belong? Here or was her chapter of magic already told? When she arrived in Beijing, her name greeted her everywhere. On banners, on broadcasts, in briefings and predictions. But the girl who stepped onto the snow, there was not the same one from Pyeongchang. She was less weightless, more deliberate, different in poise, sharper in silence. Her qualifying runs were strong, but not flawless. The field had shifted. New talent had risen. The stakes had matured. Still, she advanced. Still, she smiled after. Each run less giddy now, but with a quiet nod to herself. I'm doing this, and I'm here. On finals day, the wind was biting, the light brittle, the pipe a cathedral of pressure. Each competitor brought their fire. Each crash echoed like a warning. Chloe stood at the top, goggles down, heartbeat even. But this time, the pressure wasn't about proving who she was. It was about remembering her first run. Clean, confident. She landed complex tricks with signature style, not overly aggressive. Just steady, commanding, strong. The judges gave her a solid score high, though not unbeatable. Still, for Chloe, it wasn't just about scores anymore. It was about feeling herself again inside the lines of snow and sky. Her competitors pushed. The scoreboard tightened. Cameras zoned in on her every breath. But beneath her jacket, she felt something stronger than nerves. She felt readiness, a calm earned through ache. Then came the second run, the one people would speak of, technically dense, executed with clarity, large amplitude, intricate combinations, seamless landings. She flew not with the light-heartedness of youth, but with the conviction of someone who had faced her own absence and chosen to return. When she landed clean, there was no roar from herself, just a calm gaze up the pipe, lips pressed, a slow nod. Her score gold marked again, and most importantly, she let it in. Not the fame, not the noise, but the achievement. Because this time, it wasn't the win giving her meaning. It was the courage to re-enter the arena, to trust the snow again. When trust had once broken, she cried afterward, not from joy alone, but from release. The burden she'd carried silently for years gave way in that moment, and in its place flooded gratitude, relief, quiet pride. She hugged her team. She waved to the cameras. She stood once more atop the podium, but there was no sense of repeating past triumphs. This was something new. A second gold, yes, but more importantly, reclamation, not of dominance, but of freedom. She was no longer the prodigy, no longer the playful teen with nothing to lose. She was now a woman who had known fear, had walked away, and bravely walked back. Her strength no longer lived only in the air, but in the stillness too, in her reflection, in her consent to be seen on her own terms. This was Chloe Kim, not returning to who she was, but stepping into who she had become, and the beginning of the next story. It sat quietly in her smile, not loud, not boastful, just a whisper, steady and true. I am still here, and I still remember how to fly. Snow doesn't stay, it visits. It arrives in silence, reshapes the world for a little while, and then fades. It leaves behind no footprints as it melts, just reflections, ripples in memory. Chloe Kim's story, in many ways, feels the same. The moment of grace that passed through the half-pipe, that landed lightly in the world, and then drifted back into something quieter. But like snow, her presence was soft, not forgettable. It shaped things because snowboarding, at least the way Chloe moved through, it was never just sport. It wasn't competition, not exactly. It was language. A conversation between the body and the air, between risk and rhythm. She rode the way a poet writes each trick, a metaphor, each ride a stanza. Not striving to dominate, but to express. There is artistry in this kind of motion. Chloe didn't invent the tricks she performed, perhaps, but she sang them differently, with flow, with timing, with ease, that made difficulties seem gentle. Her amplitude stretched past the laws of expectation. She spun, flipped, twisted, not like a daredevil, but like a dancer fluent in flight. And while others shouted during their runs, she glided quiet, almost like she was listening to the snow. She once said she was most afraid, not of crashing, but of disappointing people. That fear, the kind only the tender-hearted carry, shaped the way she rode. Not seeking approval, but never careless. Even when she pushed the farthest edges of her ability, her intent felt precise, considered. She flew not for spectacle, but to meet the challenge of her own soul. In a sport once dominated by bravado, Chloe made space for something else. She didn't try to match the noise of her surroundings. She reshaped them. Let others clap loud, she would simply nod. Let others carve commercials, she carved snow. That authenticity became her greatest trick. Not just sticking the landing, but staying herself all the way down. It mattered that she was a girl in a field shaped by men. It mattered that her strength wore a smile, that her toughness never denied softness. Chloe wasn't the first female snowboarder to excel, but she was the first so young, so visible, and so herself all at once. And in that visibility, things began to ripple. Young girls saw her and began to believe, not just in her, but in themselves. That power didn't need to roar. That joy could be a form of mastery, that you could ride like lightning and still eat churros at the bottom. Her example wasn't raised high on a platform, it slid alongside others, waited patiently, and held out a hand. Come ride. It's better when we're many. Throughout her career, Chloe spoke openly about fear, not to dramatize, but to normalize. She admitted to anxiety, to pressure, to sadness. She challenged the idea that champions must always stride forward without cracks. She let the cracks show, and in doing so, changed the conversation around mental health in sport, in interviews. She smiled, she joked, but when questions turned serious, she didn't dodge. She spoke gently, but directly, like someone who knew that honesty is also an achievement. Her truth-telling gave others permission to rest, to question, to stop pretending. Every time she said, "I struggle," too, the world nodded. We do as well. And all the while she kept riding, she kept pulling color from white snow, kept turning the wind into music, kept proving that greatness is not in one moment, but in showing up repeatedly with integrity. The golds came, the applause, the features, the admiration, but she didn't grow louder with them. She stayed graceful. She let her riding be the loudest thing about her. She inspired not by demanding attention, but by accepting it quietly and redirecting it. When younger athletes asked for her advice, she told them simply, "Love your sport. Let it stay fun. Don't lose the joy chasing the wind." There's a reason people found comfort, not just awe, in Chloe Kim. It's because comfort lived inside her runs. In every clean landing, in every small fist pump, in every breath visible in the cold. She reminded us of our first sled ride, our first snowfall, the first time we went fast and didn't fall. She brought that back, not nostalgia, but presence. In the bigger picture of sport, her mark is subtle but certain. She didn't just win, she rewrote what winning could look like, what an athlete could be. Open-hearted, slightly introverted, irreverent, kind, unapologetically full of contradictions, and strong because of them. And even if she stops competing tomorrow, even if she never lands another 1080 or stands on another podium, she's already left her trace. Not like a dent, not like an imprint, but like snowfall reshaping gently, beautifully, and gone before you realized it was change. There will be others. There will always be others. New names, louder riders, bolder tricks. But Chloe's influence will show up in their ease, their honesty, their joy, in the calm glance down the pipe, the smile before action, the poetry inside the risk, because sometimes the bravest thing you do in flight is listen for its silence. And Chloe Kim has always known how to do that. She still does. The mountain sleeps now. Its breath, slow and deep beneath the frost, moves through the evergreens and across the velvet curve of the halfpipe, faint and even. The crowds are gone, the cameras stilled, the echoes of cheers long since faded into memory. Only the wind remains, slipping between branches, whispering across the snow, carrying the name of someone who once flew here, Chloe Kim. Not a headline, not a legend, not today, not in this stillness. Today, she is something simpler, a ripple in the air, a shape the snow remembers, a turn, a landing, a small gasp of joy wrapped inside gravity's pause. She does not need to arrive anymore. She is already here. Her presence lives beneath the frost like a heartbeat, quiet and known. There will be more athletes, more medals, more names printed on leaderboards, more rides etched on smartphones, pixelated and shared in bursts of digital light. But Chloe's story was never just about tricks or scores. It was always about tone, about silence, about how courage could be quiet and movement could feel like poetry. Some athletes chase greatness, others awaken it, gently folded in soft laughs. Weekend drives, bent knees between sky and snow. Chloe didn't seek to dominate. She didn't demand the stage. She didn't even stay long. But each time she flew, the cold held still in admiration. Her legacy is not a statue or a record to beat. It's a feeling. It's the hush that settles just before a drop, when even the slope seems to hold its breath. It's the smile of someone who knows they don't owe the world anything more but gives anyway, lightly, because they love the way the air catches them. When she was young, she didn't understand the weight of a name. She just liked to glide, to trace loops in powder, to feel speed lift her into something fearless. And now, years later, with answers grown from questions and strength forged in retreat and return, she still returns to that same impulse. She hasn't said goodbye. She may never need to. Sometimes, a presence echoes best when it no longer stands in the spotlight. She lingers in the way younger riders carve their lines with grace before fire, in the way they pause, just a breath before the edge, not to hesitate, just to listen. You can still hear her in that pause. You can still feel her in the wind out there somewhere. Snow falls, featherlight, tracing new beginnings on old slopes. And far above the pipe's lip, the sky remains unwritten, wide enough for all who dream. All who dare to press upward and spin gently in the spaces between effort and ease. And every time they land, Chloe's story lands too. Not loudly, not as a lesson, as a feeling you've known before but don't quite have words for. A softness, a steadiness, a whisper. Snow knows her name, and now so do we.